Yeah. You're listening to Autodesk's Digital Builder Podcast, a show that inspires construction professionals to innovate and use technology to improve how they build our world. I'm Eric Thomas, and I've been working in construction for nearly a decade. And now I have the privilege to sit down with industry trailblazers to hear how they're solving construction's biggest challenges and redefining the future of the built environment. Welcome back to Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. I am your host, Eric Thomas. Today, I am joined by Jacob Skrobarczyk, the VDC Tech Lead at DPR Construction, and we are going to be talking about people today. And that might sound a little bit vague, but I think everybody understands that people are the center of everything that we do in this industry. So I hope this will make a bit more sense here in just a few minutes, because there is a deeper connection coming, I promise. But with that delightfully ambiguous starting point, Jacob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you're here, and I'm thankful that we were connected, mid last year as everything Autodesk University was starting to spin up. But I'd like to start today's conversation a little bit differently by asking my usual recurring question first. So our listeners all know usually that's at the tail end, but I'd like to shake it up and kind of get going. So Jacob, I hope you're ready. What is one tool that you will use on every project that you work on?
So the one tool I'd use is time. So, whether it's a VDC application or really just hearing the people on the job site, I like to listen. I like to assess options, think about perspectives, and then determine what's going to have the most impact and then go. And when I go, I try to avoid thinking about just the short term next step. Like I learned from a good friend preparing for my wedding day that all the decisions I made on that day wasn't a decision for a day. It was a decision for a lifetime. And so every little detail that I contributed to that day, I would get to celebrate with my wife for the rest of our lives. And so applying the same thing to my career, it's like, let's make really impactful decisions and let's stick to them and let's drive them for years. And so I like to think out, 3 to 5 year goals and using time to make something really stick. And heard a lot of things through my career. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Go slow to go fast. And really trying to apply those to make sure that the projects are impactful and not just done.
I like that, and it's an answer I don't think I've gotten in the past. If somebody did answer that and I've forgotten, please forgive me. We've had a number of podcast episodes these days, and I forget small details on occasion. But it's a really cool answer, because time is such an interesting resource, and it's a very finite one, both just within our lives, but also within something like the scope of a construction project, whether that's 6 months or 6 years, depending on what you're actually doing. And I think if we're being very deliberate, that's when we do get that marathon conversation. We're thinking about what we're doing today, how it's going to impact 2, 3, 4, 6, 12 months. It's so stressful when life shoves us back into I'm only thinking about today and maybe tomorrow morning, because that's such a reactionary way to go about things. And it doesn't really let us, I think, do the best for both ourselves and whatever project we're working on, because it's such a reaction. It's not that proactive focus. So that's a cool answer.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of the thesis behind VDC and planning in general, right? How do you look out far enough, make decisions that are going to be lasting?
Yeah, there's so much mixed into that, and it makes a lot of sense coming from somebody who's so passionate about VDC like yourself. So you're on the money there. And as I mentioned a minute ago, Jacob and I, we were connected or right before Autodesk University. We were exploring finding an opportunity to bring him on Digital Builder. Then scheduling was a little chaotic for both of us. I was recording 21 episodes, and he was presenting at his theater talk, which is actually what that catalyst was that brought us together. So if you're not familiar with AU or Autodesk University and the theater talks, they're essentially presentations that are a lot like a TED talk. And so Jacob had a lot of really cool insights to share, and I'm excited to bring him on the show today. So could you give a bit of an elevator pitch on what your theater talk actually covered? What was the scope and theme, and how did you arrive at that presentation?
Yeah, so the talk starts with the construction labor shortage and how humans are visual learners and how visuals and data from the model could be a potential path to solving the labor shortage issue. And I use this journey to find the top mobile model viewer at DPR to help explain how a connected community of builders that can visualize what's happening is really what's going to take to attract the next generation of builders.
It's such a cool way to think about how our industry operates too, because so many people consume information in different ways, and the visual really locks in, you know, making sure that we're all on that same level as we move projects forward. I had a really great conversation with Ariana Alviar from Bolt Construction a year and a half ago. A great conversation, and she creates these really incredible visual walls that make sure that everybody on the project visually is understanding the information and the expectations in the same way. And I think that's seems to be the bread and butter of VDC. But I am curious. You talked about visuals and visualization so much in that presentation, which we'll include a link to in the show notes. So if anybody wants to check it out, they most certainly can. But can you tell me a bit more about why you feel it's such an important tool? And I think a tool that brings people together, especially within our industry. I may have given up the ghost a little bit with mentioning Ariana's incredible work, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts here.
Yeah, so I shared this in my presentation, but I'm a visual learner. And if you look at the data, a lot of people are visual learners. 65% of the population are actually visual learners. And I chose construction. What I've learned from recruiting folks is that a lot of people are planning to choose construction because they want to see what they're working on. And saying I built that feels really good. And so I think that combination of wanting to learn faster, wanting to engage with technology, and visuals are very much tied into technology, is really a path and a reason that we need to do this. If you look at the data, we retain 80% of what we see compared to 20% of what we hear. We can process visuals 60,000 times faster and can register 36,000 visual messages per hour. So if you think about it, I mean, no offense to podcasters, but it's the visual is extremely powerful, right? And the more we can apply that, the more we can attract people. I think it's common through a bunch of industries that we're seeing that the ones that are using visuals and data are winning, and they're attracting the most talent.
I'm inclined to agree with you, and it's kind of a bit of an equality conversation in some ways too, because it's so much easier to bring folks together and align on something that's more visual. I mean, I'm thinking to potential language barriers on a construction project or something. If English isn't somebody's first language, but you can bring the visual into the conversation, that's a lot more straightforward for somebody to digest and understand what their scope of work or where the challenge might be. So there's a lot that comes into that. And I think just the way people learn is so diverse as well, whether it's, they want to sit in a lecture, or they want to see something visual, or they want to read it, or they want to listen to it. And so making sure that we, go to market bringing all these options to the table so people can make sure that they're able to capture the information in the way that suits them best is huge. And I think you're absolutely right. The visual approach is a key part of it. It's actually a big reason why we stepped into video podcasts, and not just the audio side of things, because the visual element resonates in a way that sometimes just doesn't necessarily come across quite so clearly in an audio format.
Yeah, I hope my
And
enthusiasm and shirt are bringing the visuals that we need to make this exciting.
it's all good. I'm turning on fancy bright colored lights and everything just to make sure everybody knows that I'm serious, because, that's podcasting in a in a nutshell. With all of that said, I am really interested in hearing more about how this visualization passion that you've got impacts your approach as a leader of VDC. And you've been in construction for a while now. You know, why are you so excited about VDC today and the impact that this practice has on the broader construction process?
Well, I love working with people from all walks of life. And I also love using time to my advantage. And I feel like VDC is really using time and visuals to your advantage. You can see the future, and you can help, folks have a better experience in the construction industry because they can also see the future and they can de-stress their life. I think leadership is that too, right? So if you want to predict the future, you need to create it. That's something that I firmly believe in. And it's great being able to pass on knowledge and seeing folks encounter some of the same challenges, but solve them faster or solve them earlier and build on what the folks before them created. We're getting better year over year. And so we're grabbing more folks. I'm pumped about it because it's not just VDC in a silo, VDC in a dark corner. VDC is part of how we work. And so we have folks in pre-con or out in the field or craft workers. We got like specialists in VDC, but we also have generalists in all kinds of topics that can also spin a model. They can also use the data from it. And so that's getting better every year over year. And I'm just excited to get this to the finish line. Like we've talked about, how do we make VDC so impactful? And it is impactful today, but I think there's a lot of room to grow. And so that's what drives me.
And there's been such an evolution in I think the role and the visibility of the VDC teams in the last few years as well. I feel like more and more people that aren't on the VDC team are finally being empowered to leverage technology in a way that they either weren't enabled to do or didn't have the knowledge or comfort doing. And that's a really, I think, a game changing moment for construction because it's allowing people to make more decisions that are backed by data. It's allowing people to feel like they have equitable access to the project data and the scope and the scale. But I also think that the tools have really evolved in the way that people are using them has changed so much where just the data that's available in our BIM technology today and the way that that impacts our project schedules and so many nuanced layers where if your data strategy is thoughtful, you've got a lot of information to hopefully identify any of your risk areas well in advance instead of coming back to what we were talking about a minute ago, that reactive process. It's now you're being proactive. I think all those tools that you're alluding to here are instrumental in staying in that space instead of just thinking about today and maybe tomorrow morning. I am interested in hearing a bit more about what you and your team are super passionate about right now within that realm of improving upon or implementing new things at DPR and why. Like what are you jazzed up or where are your big focus areas right now within that scope? Like I think you set the stage for what you're excited about at a broad level. I'd like to hear a little bit more of the details.
Yeah. So, I mean, we are going to integrate VDC into how we work for all the work groups at DPR, right? We don't want to make VDC a sideshow. And it's not just look at a model. That's where it starts. We're at that point, right? Across the organization, we're building, virtual builders in every work group. We're trying to create this integrated virtual building team that really understands how to use the model for everything. We want to fully implement VDC. It's not just trade coordination. We want to figure out how we can deliver projects more efficiently, provide more predictable outcomes, really elevate the job satisfaction of our teams by giving them visuals and the data at every moment of the project. And so that starts with a lot of groundwork. So, I mentioned time earlier. That isn't going to happen overnight. We know it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen unevenly through the organization. There's going to be some business units and parts of the business that get way ahead of the rest. And we got to continuously be looking at how do we raise the floor? How do we raise the ceiling? How do we influence the leaders within those other work groups so that they believe in VDC as much as I do, as much as we all do within the VDC group? And that takes a while. It takes years. And sometimes people hop on board right away, but they have 15 other people they have to get aligned to. And so I think that taking advantage of time, being really strategic about identifying success stories for each of the VDC workflows, and then really messaging those success stories over and over again to get people to buy into it. It's not, DPR isn't an organization where we have a lot of top-down mandates, a lot of grassroots. We have really great executive vision, and we kind of have to stitch those things together. And so that's where our VDC team is focused, is like, how do we build relationships with the folks in the field? How do we make it so that they want us in the room to help make decisions, but also that they're not completely reliant on us. And they say like, oh, we can't make this decision related to the visuals and data from the model unless this person's in the room. We can democratize the model, right? I mean, that's a buzzword that's been around for a while, but it's like, what does that really mean? It doesn't just mean spin the model and let everybody look at it. It's like, how do we actually create a digital workflow for how we're building our projects that's assisted by models?
I love everything you've just shared because it's such a deliberate approach, and we keep coming back to time again, and I think it's a great connecting thread because these changes you just astutely alluded to, they don't happen overnight. And you really have to show folks why you're making some of these changes as well. And, I'm encouraged to hear that, DPR isn't that like really aggressive top down model. And of course, not every decision that's going to be made at a large company is going to be a democratic conversation. But it really is that conversation between what are our field teams doing? How are they using the tools they have now? How is this potentially going to disrupt those folks in some way when we do bring those changes in? And how do we hear and listen to what those are so we can either reassure them that that's okay or make sure that we're not disrupting them? And then, as you just said, showing those proof cases of this is when this went well. And look at this. These are the rewards that we're getting because if we're still siloing data and siloing decision making in the way that either was accidental because we just didn't have great data flow traditionally or was intentional because somebody's trying to gatekeep some aspect of their scope in some way that makes them feel important, or whatever reason that might be. Um, it's going to make the challenges we have with staffing our jobs and giving them resources to increase productivity, that's all going to stagnate because it's a big picture long term game. It's not just a cool, we're doing this now and we flip the switch. That's not reasonable unless you have a company of 6 people or something. It's a little easier to make change at that scale.
Yep.
So I think we've really showed now, finally, the people thread is at the center of everything that we're talking about right now. And that's the point that I wanted to make at the start of this, is even though we're talking about visualization and technology and VDC, the people are still going to be the core of that conversation. And it's one of my favorite things about the construction industry, to be honest, because we're in this very unique collaborative environment, whether it's 10 different companies all coming together to work on a single project, or 10 departments within a single company who are tackling that. And when we last connected, you had shared that during your talk at AU, there wasn't enough time to get into another topic that you're interested in, which is that ongoing challenge with finding and retaining talent. And I feel like folks might be tired of hearing us talk about that at some levels, and I have empathy because it's a bit of a circular conversation at times, but it's an incredibly important one because it's a challenge that we're all going to continue facing. And so I'd love it if you could share just some of your high level thoughts on the state of the world in hiring and labor and talent within the construction industry, and we can build on that for the rest of today's conversation.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, I mean, when I look at other industries attracting talent, and I think it's the visuals and data that's gotten those industries a leg up on construction. So, like, how many kids grew up wanting to be taxi driver or be a taxi driver or delivering food? And Uber has 5 million drivers. So in construction, we have a PR problem. I'm biased, but I think a job in construction is incredible. Like, think about sort of even being like a superintendent, which I think has one of the biggest PR problems that we have in the industry. It's like, if you look at some of the other podcasts on self-optimization, all the Andrew Huberman stuff, you're getting morning sunlight, you're getting your steps in, you get to work on something meaningful and impactful to your community, you get to be a leader, or be a part of a team. And that's this industry. Like, it's an incredible industry to be a part of. And if you add on, you also get to use advanced tech tools along the lines of an Uber type app. I think those are some of the things that we're so close to, and we have
Yeah.
such an opportunity to kind of shift the narrative. But I'm yet to see a film that portrays construction like how it really is. Like, this is this is a massive multiplayer game, right? It's Legend of Zelda in real life. It's challenges everywhere, but you got the tools to solve them, and it's like, it's fun for the people who enjoy this industry. Like, they will tell you it's great. And I've heard from people that they got friends who are teachers that are thinking about being plumbers or electricians. And I'm interested for this audience, like, likely a lot of folks within construction, like, why did you get into this business? Like, why did you choose this business?
Yeah, and I know you wanted to poll your audience at AU this year and ask them that specific question to to figure out how people either decided to become, part of this industry, or what pushed them into it, or whatever, fortuitous situation landed them in a seat similar to yours or my own. And it's an interesting narrative. And I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about why you specifically decided to join the construction industry. Like what brought you to your seat today, and what got you interested?
Yeah, so growing up, I had a few different family members that were in construction. So my uncle ran a mill and made custom cabinets. He actually built me a set of like building blocks, and I'd make towers when I was a little kid. My son uses the same blocks today. He tells me he wants to be a builder, and he's 4, so he also says he wants to be to be DPR Construction, which is super cute. It's like it's not a profession, but it's a funny thing to say. But I think that was a start, but I meandered, right? Like I thought about film school, structural engineering, eventually I think construction just sort of tractor beamed me in, right? I had an internship, and that went well. And then I went all in when I graduated. And um, when I first started, though, I was still not sure it was right for me, right? Like the part that was missing was the sort of tech side and maybe a little bit of the creative side. My dad had advised me to really be like go into like Pixar, like computer animation, and do some of that. Right, that's an emerging thing that's got really great buzz at the time. You ought to go in that direction. And going into construction, the first day I got there, I got a huge monitor. Right, it was like this deep. And I had antiquated software on it, and there was paper everywhere. And immediately I was like, man, I think I might have picked the wrong thing. But a year passed. Some technology started to trickle in. Another year passed, and we had this presentation on this thing, BIM, which I at that point I thought it was like Microsoft Word training or something like that. And we got into it, and it was models, and I was like, boom! It unlocked like all this potential talent that I had that I couldn't apply in an analog world, and is the reason that I'm in the industry today. Is that blossomed to the career I ended up creating. I think there's a lot of talented folks that don't even know that the things that we're a part of, that the technology tools that Autodesk can provide, that they even exist, and that people are applying them every day and using them, whether they're a specialist in that or they're just a worker in the business. Like everyone is starting to use these tools and use them to connect with one another. And I think that's pretty compelling. And there isn't enough messaging around that. It's what I love to do is recruit students from the University of Texas is my primary focus area for recruiting. We got people all over the country looking for this, but I like to tell people we need folks that are passionate about technology and passionate about being builders, and especially folks who want to be in the field so that we can hand off this baton to them and they can take all the data and visuals and take it to the finish line.
People are, such an important asset. And I think just the common thread, obviously safety is the first thing we think about when we step on a site and when we walk off every day. Our people are our core asset. And taking care of them is becoming increasingly critical and important for our businesses to be successful. I'd be really interested to hear more about how you think about taking care of folks at DPR, especially your field teams, and just cultivating that culture, because it's a two-pronged approach. I think on one hand, you're just, obviously you're thinking about the people because they're people. We're going to take care of our people because that's the right thing to do. And, they're the resource for whatever we're working on. There's also the business side of that you decouple from just the humanity aspect of it. And taking care of and retaining talent means that we're, retaining more people in our business. We don't have to retrain all those numbers things that, are a little decoupled from the humanity aspect of it. But I'd love to hear a bit more about, how do you think about that as a leader at DPR? And if you can, just share some of your thoughts, it'd be great.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think one of the unique things about DPR is that we have an entire part of the organization that is called and focused on taking care of people. And so within the last 5 years, we kind of added another layer of that and have dedicated resources that are taking care of craft. And so those resources, they're able to communicate in Spanish and English, and really connect with the craft. And they did a ton of research. I mentioned time earlier. They spent a lot of time getting with the craft, with translators, and making sure that they heard what they actually wanted.
Yeah.
And so the result of it was improved benefits. They ended up with paid time off, a benefit that's not typical for most craft workers. And then also apprenticeship programs. So, we have, we do work all over the country and in Europe and other places, but in the US, we have different business units that have union and do not have union training. And so in the areas where we don't have union training, there's a gap, and it's difficult to find skilled labor. And so we need to create it. So we need to create that future. Um, and so we have these training courses. We focus on deepening builder knowledge in specific scopes of work. And at the same time, we're also training folks on digital literacy. And so it's really saying, okay, let's give everybody that is in the field that is impacting the work iPads. And so let's not only give them iPads, let's make sure that they can log into iPads, right? And not only can they log into their iPads, they can log into their email. And like, so those kind of simple but significant barriers to entry are keeping people out of a connected construction platform. And so you need those barriers of entry to be resolved before you can even start having the conversation about true digital literacy and application in the field. And then we have some other cool things, like they're for situations where we have folks that maybe don't speak Spanish in rooms with people that do speak Spanish or another language. We've done a lot of live translations so that we can have like really good communication back and forth. And then we started to develop streaming videos to train on sort of mobile model viewing and other aspects that are both in English and Spanish. And so using those same translators to make these bite-sized chunk videos that they have access to, because they now have access to email and they have access to all the other systems that everybody else in the organization has access to. These are all like simple, sort of logical things that you need to do, but it's applying it to the right people and really like giving the craft and the field a chance. Not just saying, hey, nobody's using these models. It's like, what is really driving nobody using these models? Well, if you go out in the field and everybody that surrounds you is not going to come to you with a model, then it's going to be really difficult for a superintendent to say, oh, yeah, I'll use the model. They're not, if everybody else is coming to you with a sheet of paper that they had printed out that's 6 weeks old and not the latest version, and they're identifying issues, then we're not even in the right ballpark. And so all these little things have kind of built up to allow opportunities like getting to a mobile model viewer at DPR that is within that audience that's part of the craft.
Yeah, I think at the core of it, it's setting your teams up to have the tools to be successful. I mean, the training narrative, I'm hearing more and more encouraging things about the iterations that folks are making on their training programs. We've all sat in those rooms for 8 hours where a very nice person sits at the front and talks at us with a giant binder and everybody's half asleep. And how do you go back and capture some of that information later because you didn't remember 8 hours worth of a presentation off the cuff when you need to regurgitate that information in, 6 months from now. So, having tools and data and snippets, as you alluded to, available to capture and get that piece of information that person needs, because maybe they only do that one thing every 6 months and they don't remember the whole process, but you can quickly go find the video to go watch how to do that for 3 minutes and then you're good to go. You carry on. But you hit on something that I think is incredibly important in making sure that they have access to the tools that they need to do their job. I've worked for a few general contractors, and one of them did a lot of self-perform work, much like DPR does. I know, which is a really cool and interesting shift that I'm starting to see more broadly. I think as folks are trying to control how they are able to manage their skilled labor and craftspeople in a more effective way with this ongoing challenge that we're having. But I remember one of the GCs I worked at, none of the tradespeople that were self-employed, or rather tied to the self-performing, they didn't even have email addresses. Like that just wasn't a thing. And that came up for me in the sense of just distributing communications and making sure people had access to, information about notices or updates and everything else. But like what a stark barrier or a weird line in the sand to draw if you don't give everybody, equal access to all the different tools and platforms, and making sure that you are training them up to use them in understanding what your expectations are with how they use them too, because it means that they're going to be capturing the data in the way that you would like them to. So it maps back to all the different projects and you have apples to apples comparisons. And so I like your focus here of some of these things seem small, but they're actually not. Like they're very instrumental into making people feel like they're included in part of the process, but also just making sure that they have access to the tools that you think they need to do or to use to do their jobs. It's a challenging, narrative sometimes, I think, as far as making sure you have those resources in place. But once they're there, I think people are inclined to stick around too, which has a big benefit. So I'd like to step back and start thinking about both, individuals on our teams or our leaders. How can they go beyond talking about this labor challenge and perception issue that we've been talking about in what admittedly is a bit of an echo chamber? It's very easy for you and I to talk about how more people need to be aware of construction. We think this is awesome. And, if we fix this perception, we're going to be in a great spot. But that doesn't necessarily make its way out to the people that we really want to hear that message and see and understand why you and I are so fired up about what we're talking about right now. So, how do we, for lack of a better descriptor, how do we go about making construction cool again? Like, how do we bridge these gaps? Do you have any initial thoughts for, how we can start doing a better job, either as individual ambassadors or, from more of a company perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I can talk a little bit about what I've been putting in place the last couple of weeks. So, as we go to recruit, and as we try to influence, the long term, 3 to 5 year roadmap for Autodesk to attract these future builders, I've been meeting with a lot of superintendents, and so I've gone through with them about what their pain points are today, where they'd like to be in 3 to 5 years, why they're excited about being builders in the field, and these folks are super passionate about it. Like they love their jobs. They talk a lot about, hey, I get to lead a group of people that are anything from a 19-year-old electrician to an 80-year-old plumber. And we all get to build this thing together as a team. And they said that like a lot of the project engineers are sort of afraid of the job. And they think like, oh, well, the superintendent has to get there at 6:30 in the morning. But the reality is that if they're doing their job right and they're planning their work, they get to leave at 3. And so that sort of time shift, I think, plays a little bit into it. And then you get this misperception, I think, today that everybody's angry in the field. And I think a lot of the anger and the frustration stems from not having the right information at the right time. And so there may be a foreman that showed up at 6 a.m., but he didn't have the data he needed until 8 when the project team arrived. And so the more we can democratize that data, give better visuals and data, and make it so that people aren't planning one day ahead of time, then I think any of that anger, that stress, that intensity that exists today and has existed, and I think has slowly, sort of changed in the industry. It isn't as rough as it was when I was first joined in the field. And I think that sharing that sort of enjoyability of like how much enjoyment those folks in the field have building these projects and connecting those directly to, from my perspective, I'm recruiting, engineering graduates from the University of Texas, but connecting those engineering graduates directly with those superintendents that may have engineering degrees and pulling them out of the shadows. Because a lot of times today we bring a group of project engineers to go recruit the next project engineers. And they think about, well, I want to be a project executive in the future. I want to be a project manager. All the course curriculum is project management and economics, right? It's not superintendent, project manager, and economics. And so the more we can bring those folks out of the shadows, out of the job sites and say, be a part of this recruiting journey, we'll bring them to you if we need to, and make it so that it's an option. It's a choice. It's literally another simple thing. Like the connection hasn't been made. We've only gone project engineer to, intern or graduate, saying that, well, I like my project engineer job. I get to get here at 8 a.m. I don't think you're going to like the 6:30 a.m. arrival time.
Yeah.
And let's let them make those decisions themselves. They may enjoy getting their steps in. They may enjoy, avoiding being in front of a desk for 8 hours a day staring at a rectangle,
Yep.
and want to get out in the field. They want to get out in the sunlight. And so I think that as an industry, as we go to recruiting, we kind of make some decisions and set people up to make decisions that they may not want. And so as I've started to try to attract the right engineering graduates to go in this path, I'm thinking about, well, what are the positive outlooks and the positive things that these superintendents are sharing? And they're saying, hey, I feel like I'm the captain of the team. I feel like the ones that are getting further in their career, I feel like I'm a coach. And they're if you say, hey, I built that, and you're a superintendent, that's a whole different feeling than saying, hey, I built that and I'm a project engineer, or I'm in business development, or whatever you're in. It's different. And I can see it on their expressions and their faces. And I'm hoping that we can get more of those folks in front of the people making the decision on which route they want to go. Do they want to go into oil and gas? Do they want to go into tech? Or do they want to go into construction?
You make such a cool point, and it's not a framing that I've thought about candidly in the past, because you're very much right. Like the typical linear path is project engineer. I want to be a project manager someday. I want to be a project executive. That's the one that we're told. I'll tell you what, though, some of the most entertaining and interesting conversations, whether they've been on Digital Builder or sitting at a bar or on an airplane on the way back from Dubai or something, was with some of those old salt superintendents, because they have so much interesting experience and some crazy stories. Let's be real. There's a lot of interesting stuff that, crosses their day every day, and it is another path that is alongside of that, and it's a very different one from that traditional, I would like to be a project executive today. And one of those roles isn't a better role. It's what's the role that makes you feel fulfilled. And I very much appreciate the I built that feeling. I didn't get to feel that as on the nose. Let's be real. Like, I was, writing proposals and helping with contract modifications. But I do remember the first time I got to walk through a building that I had helped win the proposal on. And I was the lead proposal manager on. And it's just, I'm standing in the middle of this half finished thing. And I'm just like, wow, like this is interesting, and when I did shift into those more complex proposals, like, candidly, I don't want to be a proposal manager ever again. I did it long enough, and it's a tough job, and I burned out after a while. I've been candid about that in the past. But reading the logistics and the technical narratives and the technical sections of how we're going to get materials to this remote site in the middle of a desert or something, like all these very strange projects that I was working on when I was living in Dubai, was just very interesting. But also, I wasn't afforded the resourcing to ever get into a state where it wasn't just endlessly grueling, 6 days a week, nonstop, three different time zones. I got tired. But
Yeah.
I think in the midst of all of that, there's just really neat stuff that you just wouldn't expect, looking at a coursework book from, civil engineering or whatever path is more traditionally bringing you into construction, or not traditionally in my case. Like, even when I joined, my first GC, if you had been like, yeah, in a few years you're going to move to Dubai and you're going to do a site walk in Afghanistan, and like, 8 or 9 years after that you're going to be hosting a podcast about the construction industry and like all this stuff, I'd be like, what are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense if you haven't been shown that that path is actually there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, your career path has like a dream logic to it. It's unique. But yeah,
It is. It is.
I think at the same time, I mean, you think about the characters in the story. So you got the project executive, polished, put together. They know how to convince people that they're the right person for the job. And then you have the superintendent that is communicating with on a really wide range of folks and getting stuff done, and is maybe historically not the best salesperson. And then ask them to say, hey, who's going to do a better job selling their job as the right path to go down? And historically, the project executive has done a better job. The project manager out has done a better job. But if you really get down to that dopamine hit that you got when you went on the job site and said, hey, I contributed to this. Now imagine that daily, and imagine that closer to the action. And so I think that we're missing out on that as an industry. And even then, like, you say, hey, well, these superintendents, they're putting in the long hours. And what I've seen is as we provided more technology and as it's gotten closer and closer to a video game, the requests I'm getting from the superintendents is like, hey, can we make this a video game? Because I'd go play this when I go home. And so if you have that much passion for your industry that you're like, hey, I want to operate the crane when I'm at home because during the day I have to direct work and check quality and make sure that we're on schedule. Like those are people that have a true passion for it. And I think it goes all the way. Like from my perspective, if I could have a fantasy construction team, I would. I'd go to all the big cities and say, who are the superintendents? How fast are they going to get this job done? And how do I put some dollars on them? Because I'm that passionate about this business and that excited about like, how are these builders actually making this happen? They were doing some incredible work. And I don't think that it's advertised enough. And I think it needs more attention.
I'd agree with you there. And I think one of my favorite things that I've heard folks talk about is when they pair the supers or some of the more experienced folks on the project site, regardless of what the role is, with some of those project engineers or interns, in watching the way that those two groups connect, because whether your super is a tech savvy super or not, although most of them are starting to get there because the tools are also easier to use than they were, 5 years ago, which is great. The enthusiasm for the knowledge transfer both ways is such a cool thing to hear about, because that general super has so much information in his brain that is so relevant and useful and will be relevant and useful for many, 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 many years. And that fresh out of school project engineer might have that skill set with the technology. He might understand Revit front and back or whatever we might be talking about, or drones or hardware tech, all these different things. And we get to unify those and help educate the person who might not be so experienced in building, along with sharing that information with the technology back and forth. It's just a really neat thing. And I think it's a requirement now, because we need to keep gathering that information as some of those supers are, inching quickly towards retirement in the next 5 years.
Well, and one perspective that I think is interesting is like, yeah, I feel like a young person, but as I go and interview these superintendents and start to think about that perception of the old crusty superintendent, most of the folks that I've interviewed, and DPR does a really great job of this, putting folks in positions that are capable of doing it regardless of age. And so most of the superintendents I've interviewed are younger than me, and so they're
Really?
leading these teams. And yeah, I look young, but they're younger than me, and uh, it's surprising, right? But it's also like they're at the age they need to mentor that next generation of builders, and when they go to mentor that next generation of builders, they already come equipped with model and digital literacy, and they're. I went to one of the job sites, and I'm trying to get my I don't go to enough job sites, right? I don't get in the field enough. I just got a new laptop. I have Windows 11 on there. This podcast is brought to you by Microsoft, apparently. But I throw down that laptop. I'm going to plug into the HDMI. I have no HDMI ports at this point. I go to cast. I now have Windows 11, and they've moved the cast button somewhere else. And the superintendent comes in the room and is like, "Hey, man, you go to here, you change your setting here, and you're casting." And he's providing tech support to tech support, right? And so we go through that. The next superintendent walks in and is like, "Why didn't you just hit Windows K?" And it's like, okay, guys, like you guys are ahead of me. You're younger than me. You're passionate about what you're doing, and so how do we bottle that up and get people to realize that that's happening in the industry now? And that's going to set us up for this future state, and we're actually behind now, right? We got to start preparing for this next generation of builders that is going to want more than we can even provide from a tech standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the organizations that haven't started down this digital journey and really embracing, more innovative workflows and being very clear about encouraging innovation at their companies and giving them the runway to try stuff. If you're presented with two offers and the dollar value is equal, or even if another company might be paying a bit less but is doing more interesting stuff, people are going to gravitate towards that other company, because I couldn't imagine sitting down at a contractor and, being given a ancient laptop and, okay, cool, we're going to do it like you were doing it 15 years ago. Enjoy writing that proposal in Microsoft Word. And then I just, sit down and quietly start to cry into my hands because I'm good. I don't want to do that anymore,
Right. Right.
but we have to make sure that we're providing those tools to keep this conversation interesting for the folks that haven't stepped into it yet, or keep it interesting for the folks that are in it and want to stay curious and have that privilege to try new things. Because nothing stinks more than getting stuck in a role where you feel like you're stagnating, or you're doing literally the exact same thing every single day without any real autonomy to influence any of that. Like, that's a great way to lose an employee as well. So like it's such a multi-layered approach. I think we're going to have to employ in the next, well, months, not even years. Like, we need to start doing this stuff now to
Right.
to continue this conversation. And so let's keep this dialogue open, man, because I'd love to hear occasionally if you hear anything interesting in the future, as far as, how are you getting somebody excited, or you run across somebody and you share a nugget and makes them light up. I want to know about it, because I'll share it on this program where it's appropriate as well, because I'd like to get that message out to more people, because we're going to be in trouble in 10 years if we don't do a good job today of making sure that folks understand the importance, but also just the cool factor of what we're doing in construction.
Awesome.
So I've got one more question for you, Jacob. Well, two more questions, but one more on the scope of our conversation today. And I think we've touched on this a bit, but as a admitted technology nerd, I've got to bring us back here a little bit. But could you share some more of your thoughts on how technology will play a role in supporting these people in the future, and compare that to where we're at today? I think we've started unpacking that, but like, if you could look in 5 or 10 years from today, like, where does technology fit into the either capturing and retaining talent, or doing more with less resources? How do you think that is going to evolve?
Yeah, so I see it as being hugely impactful. I think we're seeing a lot of it today, but it's in pockets. And so where we have this really uneven application of technology, I think it's going to be more consistent across all the organizations in the industry. And I think the ones that don't keep up are going to have this existential crisis. Like, I think that we're going to start to see, 20, 30, 40% productivity improvements in certain areas because of technology. I think there's a huge piece on the data exchange from designers to the construction, sort of this design to build space, where we have so much waste. We got people dimensioning and annotating 500 times on one sheet, so that the next person will throw that in the trash and create a model to then go dimension and annotate on the next. And there's just these like sort of 50% waste factors in everybody's step, because we can't hand things off digitally. I think that's going to start to go away, but it will go away in pockets, and there'll be these massive improvements in those pockets. And what we're betting on, we're hoping on at DPR, is that our strategies will help sort of tie that together. So we're focusing on self-perform work, VDC, prefab, design to build, and behind all of that is data. And so within the strategies that we have, it's really about attacking this labor force shortage and retaining talent, because I think those are the things that people will be excited about. Control your own destiny through self-perform work, be able to see the future through VDC, take some of that labor off the job site and into factories for prefab, and really be able to influence the design by saying, how do we make this more efficient? We need more feedback earlier in the project, and make sure that feedback can be efficient. And I think that sometimes the technology tools get in the way of making that feedback loop present. But I think that we'll start to see that true connection of the digital thread throughout the life cycle, and we'll start to see that coming back to help inform designs for future projects. And yeah, I just think technology is going to become more and more and more a part of it. And at the same time, I think we're going to have to balance this. That's why I'm really I feel like the superintendent role is really appealing to this next generation of folks, is balance this tech addiction that I think exists within, society as a whole, with like, how do we make sure that tech is helpful? And so you don't want to be on your phone all day. You don't necessarily want to be in front of a shiny rectangle all day. How do we make the tools and the technologies apply in a world where we all need to be able to check out sometimes, but also have the right information at the right time?
I like everything you're sharing here, and I'm very much inclined to agree. I've got an optimistic outlook as far as the role and the evolution of technology, but I think we're starting to break down some of those communication barriers too. And I love your point about the feedback loop needs to be closed a little bit more effectively. I think both during the actual life cycle of an existing project, where you know folks have more opportunity to inform designs, and there's a chance to pull in the steel detailer who's got a bunch of experience that's super relevant, and take a look before we pens down, designs done, cool. And then you get in the field and you go, that's not buildable that way. Let's let's start an RFI. Nobody wants a change order, and I think we're going to be getting away from more of that soon. I mean, Sid Hacksar talks about the end of RFIs and the importance of pre-construction, making that a reality. And I think the more folks who have a seat at the table at the right moment, it's going to have a big impact. But I also really like your point of bringing the data from a completed project into the next one as well. I mean, obviously, a lot of what we do in the construction industry is bespoke projects where it's like, this is a unique build for this scenario, but there's still so much to learn from those prior projects. And there's a lot of data that you can bring and say, okay, this didn't go well this time. What was the contributing factor? Does the project always slip behind when we work with the specific sub? We have some data that indicates this. Or is it because that people are capturing data in a different way and we didn't deploy this tool on these projects? And now you get to kind of put those side by side and go, okay, well, that didn't work very well, but this did. Let's do this on this next project, instead of just receive RFP and panic, which I've unfortunately been on the other side of that as well. So I think there's a lot to be excited about, and you know it's still just really cool to see. We went from such a small scope of purpose built tech to where we're at today, where I have empathy for anybody in a role similar to yours, to be honest, because there are a lot of choices to be made as far as what technology you're going to bring to the table. And it can get overwhelming, or some folks might get stuck in chasing the shiny new toy. And that might not be the right thing at the right moment for the business, while still obviously trying to stay ahead of the competition. So there's a lot to be considered all at once. But I think the long term is something that we should all be super optimistic about. So it's cool. So I've got one final question for you today, sir. Is there anything that you'd like to plug or share, or anything you're working on that you think folks would be interested in? And of course, if there's a way for people, if they've got a question, to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah. So yeah, for the folks that are about to graduate from universities in the United States, we got recruiting teams out at expos and career fairs across the country. So connect with the folks from DPR Construction. Ask them about a position, a field engineering position. It's sort of a path to a superintendent position. Learn more about it. And if you want to be a project engineer, come talk to us as well. Right? We're looking for people. And then also, like, if you're looking for a position, from a craft position all the way up to a project executive position, or anything in between, check out the DPR website. We have a careers page, and that's a great place to start to apply.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure that our producer throws the link to the careers page in the show notes for this episode, if anybody wants to check that out. I think I'm connected with you on LinkedIn, so I'll just send the masses your way via LinkedIn if they've got any questions for you. But otherwise, I really appreciate everything you've shared today, Jacob. I mean, I've had a real pleasure of meeting a lot of folks from the DPR team, and you're doing a lot of really cool stuff. And so I think if you're out there listening and looking for a new role, it's probably probably a good spot to go kick some tires. For everybody out there listening, of course, I am your reliable host, Eric Thomas. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I believe I am the only Eric Thomas that works at Autodesk. But if you just plug Eric Thomas Digital Builder into some random internet machine, you'll probably find me at this point. So it shouldn't be too hard. Otherwise, if you are listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the main players, as I mentioned earlier, we are a video first podcast. So you should head over to YouTube and check out what we're up to. See what Jacob and I look like. He's got some cool media technology floating on some shelves behind him that I'm going to pester him with questions after this wraps up. And of course, if you have any suggestions or questions for me, I'm always very much happy to hear from folks and learn a little bit from you as well. So don't hesitate to reach out. And without any further ado, goodbye.